as Stanley said, we're very honored to have Gillian here with us. Gillian is the Assistant Managing Director of the Development and International Group and Chief Sustainability Officer at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, overseeing the development of Singapore as an international financial center, as well as the MAS's sustainability strategies and international relations. So thank you so much for joining us, Gillian.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much, Dorothy, for having me.
So tell us a bit, how successful has the MAS been in its ambitions for Singapore to be Asia's private markets hub? And could you share with us some key statistics that demonstrate Singapore's success?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about a private markets hub, I think there are really two dimensions to this. The first is, how successful are you as a home or a base for enterprises to raise capital? The second is, how successful are you, how conducive is your hub for investors to come together and really work with each other, tap on opportunities, and so on. So on the first front, which is really around enterprise fundraising, that function needs to work really well. We heard from Patrick earlier, and if you think about Southeast Asia as a region, the IMF is quite clear. We're going to be the fastest growing region in the world in this decade. So that function of Asian enterprise fundraising is really quite critical. And on that front, I think we've done fairly well. Last year, about $7 billion USD was raised out of Singapore. And if you think about the Southeast Asia numbers as a whole, which is about plus or minus 13 billion, that makes up more than half. So I think we're doing quite well. That's largely driven, I think, by Singapore unicorns, but also unicorns with a very deep international investor base. You've got your household names, of course, Ninja Van, Carousel, but also it's been really good to see the unicorns be quite broad-based and across many sectors. So, anything from payments for gamers, I think it's called Coda Payment, to digital therapeutics and healthcare. There's a unicorn called Bioformis. So all these unicorns are able to tap on Singapore to raise funds. I think that's very powerful. The second dimension that I mentioned is, how good is this as a private markets hub for investors to come together and connect? And I think on that front, pretty good. If you just look at the number of asset managers, that's increased by 13% in just a year and a half. And we now have something like 1,250 of these managers here. So really good, buzzing community. I think the interesting question, Dorothy, is what is driving this? To a large extent, it's been a PE VC growth story. PE VC's grown really well. The CAGR is about 30% over the last 5 years, which we're quite pleased with. And we now have something like 450 PE VC managers here. And that growth, again, just taking the last 1.5 years, has been about, I think, 15%, so not bad. But the trouble with a hub is when things become too lopsided with a particular archetype or a particular type of manager or stakeholder. And so it's been heartening to see that community grow in quite a well-rounded way. So on top of PE, VC managers and asset managers in general, we've got a growing community of asset owners, sovereign wealth funds, global public investors, pension funds, and of course our family office segment. So family offices, it's well known that it's grown well. I think as of last year, we were looking at about 1,100 family offices now based out of Singapore and looking for opportunities. On the asset owner side, a few of us were very privileged to be at AIMCO's opening of their Singapore office, which will serve APAC just last week. And they joined Canadian peers as well as Korean peers, like NPS and KIC, and the Qataris are here as well. But taking one step back for a moment, I think despite the fact that global markets have been exceedingly challenging of late, what we're seeing in Singapore is a real sort of ecosystem tipping point moment where, I think we're getting to a point where that virtuous cycle of institutional investors, that deep insti base, is now able to tap on networks and give opportunities and co-investment deals with that very large PE VC manager base as well. So in summary, I think we've got the fundamentals here, we've got the infrastructure here, we've got the community here, and hopefully the opportunities as well. And I think collectively, that's what you need for a hub.
That sounds impressive. What steps has MAS taken to attract more alternative asset managers to Singapore? And in this context, how has the asset management ecosystem in Singapore evolved?
Thanks very much, Dorothy. I think that gives us a bit too much credit. I suspect, a lot of what's been driving the rise in alternatives in Singapore are sort of really deeper structural drivers. They're attracted to Singapore for rule of law, for other reasons as well, and we're very grateful for that. But on the MAS front, I think broadly, we look at three things. Platforms, policies, and players. So maybe just taking the first one, policies, right? That's bread and butter. The regulatory environment has to be conducive for folks to come in. And on that front, a few years ago, we did things like simplifying our VC fund manager regulatory regime, right? Really making sure that requirements like capital, business conduct, director, the sort of requirements we required of directors, all that was streamlined and made easy so that VC folks could feel very welcome and settle down easily. Another component to policies that we've worked on and we continue to work on is making sure that the fund structures that you have in Singapore are fit for purpose. A classic example, the VCC, enables that co-location of the domicile of the fund as well as the management of the fund. So you can share, infrastructure, common folks that manage these things. And I think that's led to cost savings. The proof is in the pudding. More than 900 VCCs in this very short time that we've launched it, and cuts across more than 500 managers. So more than 500 managers now have at least one VCC. And we'll continue to work on things like the limited partnership and making sure that works as well. So policies. The second is really players. And we do try to be a welcoming home for big global managers that want to set up shop here. And they bring the buzz, but more importantly, they bring the capabilities and the opportunities for the rest of the ecosystem. So in recent times, it's been wonderful to welcome folks like Permira, HarbourVest, HPS, and a lot of these managers actually do designate Singapore as their APAC hub. Another interesting trend that I have been very encouraged to see is a number of managers using Singapore as their base to set up digital capabilities. So General Atlantic is a good example of that. They've got a center of excellence here in Singapore that looks at data science and AI. So, I think if we have more of those capabilities here, it will attract more opportunities and it benefits the ecosystem as a whole. The last P, platforms. Now, I think we already got a sense from your conversation with Patrick, the complexity that the market's seeing, the speed of change, the multi-dimensional nature of the challenges that we all have to be alive to. And in that environment, I think success for all of you is really deeply correlated with two factors. One is the strength of your partnerships, and the second is your proximity to networks. And given that, I think platforms becomes a hugely important element. And in private markets specifically, private market platforms can democratize access to private markets, open up a whole new client base, connect enterprises with investors, whether early stage, late stage, and so on. And finally, provide a forum or a mechanism for exits, which, as we've discussed, is really, really key. So with that, it's been wonderful to see the rise of private market platforms here. I think we've got SharePost and a few others as well. And actually, Dorothy, on this point, on platforms, I think we really have to stop for a moment and acknowledge conveners offline platforms, human platforms, like what SuperReturn does. And it's wonderful that, you're coming to Singapore, you're returning to Singapore, and will continue to be in Singapore for a couple of years yet. We're very, very happy about that.
We love Singapore. Thank you. Can you give us an example of the kind of partnership you are looking to establish with global investment managers?
Yes. I think when we think about partnerships, where the real value is, at least from the regulatory perspective, is on partnerships that are very strategic collaborations that can unlock value for each of you and for the industry as a whole. And that tends to be in areas which are new, which are nascent, which are a little bit uncertain. I think one recent example is DeFi. So a lot of the managers we speak to are hugely interested in decentralized finance and the use cases there because of cost savings, the broader investor base, the enhancement of use cases. But some uncertainty still, right, around regulatory perimeters, will this use case take off, and so on. So last year, the MAS launched Project Guardian, which is precisely to look at that, right? So let's think about asset tokenization use cases, but let's also find a way to manage the risks around that, whether it's stability risk, integrity risk. And it's not just regulators that should be worried about these risks, it's the managers as well. So Project Guardian brings these pilots together, brings the regulator and innovators together at the table and figure this out together. So it's been wonderful to see pilots, including by UBS, AM, Schroders and Calistone have worked together to really see whether, for example, we can issue a VCC fund on a digital network. Wouldn't that be exciting? The broader point, though, is that as the world continues to evolve and things get more complex, we will need to build the muscles to be nimble here, right? So collectively, industry, regulator, how can we be nimble enough to identify and quickly pick up these emerging opportunities and quickly have the platforms to come together and work together to unlock value?
And given your role as MAS's Chief Sustainability Officer, could you share with us MAS's views on how private markets can play an active part towards net zero?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, let's share some statistics, right? The gap. So in Asia alone, we're looking each year at a shortage of about $1 trillion USD in investment, just for Asia to get to net zero by 2050. So 1 trillion. Global capital markets, 260 trillion. And dry powder, I think the latest Preqin estimates put it at about 4 trillion. So gap, 1 trillion. Global capital markets, 260. Global dry powder, 4. What can we take away from that? There is clearly money in the market. So that's not the issue. And also, what I take from the dry powder and all the rest of it is that private markets potentially could play a transformative role in getting capital to where it needs to be. And PE VC players, quite apart from the numbers, it's well known, and you know this as well. The role that you've traditionally played means that you work closely with your portfolio companies. They listen to you. So, you guys are in a position to sit down with your portfolio companies and really talk through and map out the deep operational and structural and strategic, really, changes that these companies need to make. And let's be very clear, it will be a significant transformation. This is not just a coal issue or an oil and gas issue. Our economies are just so interlinked. Supply chains are so interlinked. This will be a fundamental economic transformation, and everyone needs to be on top of it. Now, folks ask me, really, what should we focus on as a main, organizing idea? What should we focus on? I think we need to focus on transition. So, unfortunately, the ESG conversation in many parts of the world now has become a risk conversation. It's become a regulatory compliance conversation. That's not the Asia journey that we want. I think the journey in Asia will be different. Our focus will be very much on enabling transition and decarbonization, because goodness knows our economies need that. And I think that's healthy, because if we focus too much on risk and compliance, we end up, from an investment perspective, I think, with a very ESG or nothing philosophy. And what happens when you have that is everyone is just searching out the greenest of the green opportunities. And capital just goes to a very limited sliver of our global economy, something like 8 to 10% at most. But that remaining 90% of the global economy that badly needs decarbonization, that badly needs transformation, there's a wealth of investment opportunities sitting right there. So, my hope is very much that the folks in this room hear this and focus on the transition opportunities that we have. It's been quite promising, I want to say. So please, I hope this is not coming across as a lecture, because it absolutely is not meant to be. We track these things quite closely. And actually, the PE International recently put out a report, and we know from that report that only 12% of LPs felt that their GPs were not paying enough attention to climate risk. Only 12%. So that's a really good report card, everyone. And I think we can just do better. I think the year before it was something like 30%. So you guys are improving and doing well. But just one last point on this, if I may. I think it's important to kind of look ahead, right? The challenges are real. PEVC folks want to do more, but there are certain challenges, I think, that keep them from being able to channel capital or more capital there. What do we really need, I think, is much more standardization. Much more standardization in the way we calculate the amount of decarbonization that we unlock for every dollar of investment. If we can get that standardized as a system, I think we'll make much more headway. And please do look out this week for some announcements, I think at New York Climate Week, because I think there are good folks and good platforms looking to do that.
And given the vast amount of capital needed to be mobilized towards greening the financial system, scaling blended finance is one of the approaches. How do you think global regulators can channel private capital to decarbonize the world while meeting the needs of private investors?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think blended finance has become a very topical issue. We all understand blended finance as a construct. We all get it, right? You bring together funds from concessionary sources, commercial capital is crowded in, and voila, we have the solution. Very easy to say in theory, but I think the tendency has been to focus on what you bring to the table. We need to move away from that focus, I feel, to a greater focus on what each sector or what each stakeholder needs to come to the table. So, with private markets, with investors, it's very clear. You need commercial returns. We get that, right? For philanthropic capital, maybe they've got a bit more flexibility on the risk-return sort of dimension. They're a bit more patient, which is great. But please, let's not take them for granted as well. The philanthropies that I speak to, including the biggest boys of them all, they'll tell you that they're increasingly aware that even their pot of money is not infinite, right? And they want to see bang for their buck. They want to see clear outcomes that they get from this capital. So if you take a step back and you look at that picture, and obviously governments have their own mandates and their own concerns as well. So if you take a step back and look at that, you realize that the market cannot do this job organically. It just cannot. This is not a market gap problem. This is a problem of coordination. And that's where the Singapore approach comes in. So our approach is really to convene everyone, bring them together, and map out, right? So whatever your needs are, right? Whether you're an investor, you're a philanthropist, you're a government, whatever your needs are across the climate capital stack, we'll combine solutions that meet those needs with critical building blocks, technical assistance, risk management, currency solutions, hedging, and so on. And we'll combine that together in a single platform. And Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has mentioned that this month at the New Delhi summit, and we're putting together a blended finance platform for that. I know time is running short, so all I will say is there will be opportunities for asset managers to come in and help us manage specific programs within this platform. And we very much hope that this platform will actually grow the pipeline of investable green and transition assets for all the folks in the room.
Gillian, I could talk to you all day. The clock is at 0. Stanley's standing there. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Yeah.